Good morning as folks are joining. I taught my class online last night at 6 p.m. And as I started the Zoom, I said, Good morning. It's muscle memory. It was 6 at night. Clarence Little, I see you're here. Congratulations on the win last night. Uh, the Toronto Yankees, the Yankees won. Facing elimination. I see there's more Yankee fans. At least you, that's the spirit, Clarence. At least you won't get swept. My Philly fan cousins are not feeling the same way about the Phillies right now. Oh well, we have the Celtics coming and the Patriots. Drake May. Victoria, as you are starting, you should be able to share your screen.
Mhm.
And if you just tell us a little bit about you and your current role, how you came to it, and we're excited to hear your update.
Great. Good morning, everybody. It's so nice to be here to see all of you. My name is Victoria Bergeron. I work at the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation. We are a kind of nonprofit public policy research group and do a lot of work around the state budget. I get to do all our early ed work, which I love. And today I'm going to be talking about our newest early ed report. Let me get to the screen. And then present. Let me know, do you see
It has popped up. You have secured screen share and the hardest part
amazing.
of the 9:30 call.
Great. All right. So the report that we released a couple weeks ago is around the early education workforce, something that we've been working on for a long time, that a lot of people have been working on and talking about, and excited to talk about it a little bit today, and also just get any feedback. I think something that was really cool for this report for me was as I was writing it, and then after the release, getting feedback from folks. There's always extra questions that pop up after a report comes out. So I really appreciate kind of getting that feedback. And as I'm going through, if there's any, questions that come to your brain as I'm talking about a specific piece, feel free to put them in the chat, and it just kind of helps me kind of think more creatively about my work, which is really great. This slide here, just for when I send the slides out later for you all, kind of lists some of MTF's other publications and our website. I also linked to the State House briefing that we did with strategies
Oh, great.
last month on kind of early ed 101 funding, and definitely going to be doing some more work like that going forward. So I'm excited about that. But I'm
And sorry, I just put the link in the chat. I put the description that you have for today, which has the link to the
great.
report in the chat. And as you know, I'll monitor the chat for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. So I'm just be going through kind of how we got to writing this report, our goals, talk through a little bit about the demographic data that is included in the report, and also kind of the first recommendation of the report is that we need better data. So that's one big thing there. Digging into the challenges, I'll probably not spend too much time there because that's all stuff that we know really well on this call. But then kind of highlighting increase in state investment in early educators and some programs that have had really positive outcomes, and then finish up with what MTF's recommendations are. So we worked with the Eastern Bank Foundation on this report, again, to really just build on past research that MTF has done, that other researchers have done in this space, highlighting successful investments that have focused on educator needs, and then really trying to spark conversations in the policy world about how to kind of build on this recent progress and just make more success happen. The three key questions that, of course, I think are very known in this space, but what are the barriers that are limiting new educators from entering the field? What makes it difficult for educators to persist and be successful in the field? And then what does that mean for kind of the sector as a whole, the sustainability of programs? So I'll get into these a little bit, but again, a lot of stuff that folks on this call know very well. Folks on Beacon Hill, less so. So that's kind of also why we wanted to put this report out and hit these points. So before we get to those questions and challenges, some information on the demographic data that we shared in the report, which felt important to do just to set a baseline of who are early educators in the state. But I did find some challenges looking at the data that was available to me. I used C3 data, which was really great for looking at family childcare providers, but less so for center-based educator demographics. And then also kind of pulled from recent other research that had been published in 2022 with the Boston Opportunity Agenda and Boston Foundation, and then went back to the 2019 UMass Boston Educator Survey, which had a really good statewide sample, but the main challenge there was, naturally a few years old. There's likely been a lot of shift in the workforce since the pandemic, and so one of the main challenges I had was trying to see if I could get at and what any of those shifts might be with the data available, but mainly what I found was that we really need a better system to collect this real-time data going forward. But what we do know from those surveys, which I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'll drop the links to these reports in the chat after I'm done here, so you can dive deeper. But generally, a very experienced workforce, as we all know, and then smaller percentages of young educators. But really, again, I think hopefully we would like to get kind of more updated data on this as well, especially as EEC is working on their new career pathway model. Education levels in the workforce. Both the 2019 survey and the 2022 survey had, similar levels of educators receiving post-secondary education. But some follow-up questions that came up for me as I was going through was, again, what are the pandemic effects? Have there been changes based on state programs to increase college participation for older adults as well? How has that been, how has that affected the workforce if it has? And so those are just some examples of those follow-up questions that came up for me as I was looking at this data. For kind of diversity, race, and ethnicity data, this was something that was kind of fun to play with. What I chose to do was focus on FCC providers because that was the best data that we could get from C3 was on FCC providers. And I kind of wanted to look and see if you could see a difference between the demographics of the FCC educators who were surveyed in 2019 by UMass Boston and the data that C3 has been able to collect. So again, this is really not a perfect comparison. I don't think this would pass, a lot of tests we could run, but just as an exercise, this is what I did, kind of comparing the percentages of different race and ethnicities in 2019 to 2024. And really, what this kind of implies, looking at these numbers, is that there has been a huge increase in diversity in the FCC space, especially due to the growth in Hispanic Latino providers. So I think this is something that I would love to dig deeper into and see if we can get better state data to see if this kind of tracks out as we go forward.
I really appreciate the red font
Yes.
disclaimers. And just a note that there are many research types on the 9:30 call this morning, so it's great to see them. And at our Early Childhood Summit next week in Worcester, we can put that link in chat. There's going to be a research discussion. So if you haven't RSVP'd yet, please join us because I think this is exactly the kind of conversation we need to be having. So thanks.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's kind of just summarizes some of the demographic data I shared in the report and really led into our first recommendation that it would be really helpful for researchers and policymakers and the field to have more updated, real-time, accurate data on who the workforce is so that the state can build more effective and responsive policy. So the recommendation we had was to incorporate some of this demographic data collection into EEC's upcoming educator portal to hopefully kind of streamline that process and make comparing data over time more reliable as well. All right, so I won't spend too much time on these things, but as we all know, educator compensation in the field is a huge challenge towards supporting the growth of the workforce. This chart gives you a snapshot from July 2021, which was the start of C3 of where salaries were for educators at centers and for FCC assistants, and then comparing on the right the average salaries during that school year for K-12 educators in the state. So an FCC assistant in 2021 was making just over almost $31,000 annually if you kind of use a calculation for what a full-time year-round annual salary would be. Another kind of follow-up question that I heard after the release was, a lot of the data published at the state level for compensation is by hourly wage, and kind of what message does that send for how we think about educators and their workforce and the professionalism. As when you look at K-12, for example, it's annual salary. So I tried to kind of do that translation here, and definitely something to work on going forward. But again, for a center-based teacher, they were making about $39,000 a year versus the average teacher salary was $86,000 a year. And then even because, of course, Boston especially kind of inflates those average statewide numbers, but even looking at the 10 lowest paying K-12 school districts, we're still making about $10,000 more annually than the average center-based early educator. This is also something that I think is very well known, but definitely something that I wanted to highlight is also, in addition to wages and compensation, the struggle with benefits for educators. Something that, I've heard a lot before, especially in the FCC space. It's really difficult for educators to access healthcare, retirement, even just, paid sick time, which I think kind of gets lost sometimes, but those numbers were pretty shocking. And then again, another follow-up question as I was kind of working through the report, there's the data we have is kind of, the access that educators have at their employers for these benefits. And a piece of feedback I received was there are often instances where an employer or provider will make benefits available to their educators, but what percentage of those educators opt out of utilizing those benefits because their paychecks are already low and they don't feel like it would be, you know, they would be able to take out, 401k contributions or things like that from their already low paychecks. So that's one follow-up question I have to dig deeper into. And then I also looked at, in addition to compensation and benefits, the kind of next most common um, piece that I hear about why it's hard for educators to be retained and to thrive in the sector is unclear career advancement pathways. So this chart is a survey from the 2022 report, and asked educators their reasons for leaving their last job. Low wages and salary, which makes sense, was the highest singular answer. But when you combined the responses, those educators who said they left because there were no opportunities for professional growth, and similarly, those that said there were no opportunities to advance to a new role, it reaches the same percentage as those who said they left because of low salary. So that's something that I wanted to pull out there. And then, of course, that really all translates to a system that is really hard to grow and be sustainable. We've seen high turnover rates, especially for assistant educators, but for center teachers as well. And then one follow-up question, which I didn't have on the slide, but could we look at the numbers of FCC programs that are closing? Could that be a kind of um, parallel to the turnover rate that we see in centers? So that's something to dig into, but really just wanted to highlight the um, U.S. Health and Human Services definition for what constitutes high turnover is anything over 20%. So even for center teachers, they are considered having high turnover in the sector. And this is from 2023 as well, so it would be good to get more updated numbers on this. All right, so turning to kind of bright spots and all the work that's been done in the past few years to kind of work on those challenges. So all in all, funding for the Department of EC has gone up by over $1 billion since FY 2020, fiscal year 2020, which is a huge increase in investment to the system. A lot of that has gone to expanding CCFA, increasing provider reimbursement rates, and of course, funding C3, which especially for centers has gone to support the workforce. A majority of that funding has gone to workforce needs. And one question I had was, when we look at the difference between that pie chart for center-based programs and for FCC programs, how do we support FCC providers so that right now those grants are going to cover a lot of, capital costs, a lot of other costs, and they're not being able to invest that funding back into themselves and into their staff. So how do we kind of incentivize that? How do we help FCC providers do that? EEC is also currently developing a new credentialing system and a new pathway system. So I kind of describe that work in the report. That's something that I'll be excited to see as that rollout and implementation continues. But especially wanted to highlight the focus they're having on allowing for educator choice and different pathways, focusing on different skill sets outside of the classroom as well for educators who want to leave the classroom or do other roles at their programs, especially for FCC and out of school time providers, the skills that they need to be successful. So in this kind of vein, we also wanted to really emphasize the importance of the Career Pathways Grant Program, and also looked into a little bit of the apprenticeship programs that have been put out in recent years. And we think it's important to really continue funding for career pathways, as that's very, centered on the early educator experience. In addition to, like I said, outside more general college and post-secondary education funding that the state has been focused on, but that program in particular is really important. And then also kind of, it would be great, and I think that EEC is in the process of doing this, to study the actual impacts of the registered apprenticeship programs and seeing what outcomes they have, and how we can kind of build on them. I also highlighted in the report the EEC staff childcare program, which was started in a pilot in 2023 to support early educators in being able to have assistance for their own childcare. EEC put out a survey of participants in that program, and it really was very clear that it had a major positive impact on both the educators and the children's kind of routines and well-being. About a third of educators who received funding through the pilot changed their child care arrangement after receiving CCFA. A lot of them had previously only been using parental care. And I think that this is an interesting survey to look at, next to what Professor Jeffrey Liebman shared last week, a kind of parent preferences. And, our educator preferences, are there, as parents, are they different than other parents who don't work in the field or whatnot? But 80% of respondents said that the pilot had a positive impact on their child's well-being, reduced their stress level, increased the stability of care for themselves and their child, and also made them feel more committed to their current job. So this is a huge, huge benefit that I think we recommend kind of continuing to support, especially as there are still additional educators who would qualify for this, but are on the wait list because funding has been limited. So increasing wages, as we know, C3 has been incredibly helpful, as well as the increase in provider reimbursement rates to support increasing wages in the field. So this chart kind of shows the growth that we've seen since November 2021 to May 2025. Again, I kind of want to keep in mind the K-12 salary comparisons next to it, um, as there's still a long way to go, as we know. And then the last kind of section I had in the bright spots category in the report was the growth in FCC providers that we've seen since the pandemic. FCC providers have seen the largest growth in the sector, growing by about 18% between 2023 and 2025, which translates to more than an additional 6,000 kids enrolled in FCC care. So that's a huge piece that I think I wanted to lift up. During the same time, I think the center-based growth was about 4%. So huge growth. Naturally, you know, numbers, capacity is smaller at an FCC program, but still that makes a huge difference being able to support the growth of that sector as well.
And Victoria, just as an example, like
Mhm.
where are these numbers from? Are they from licenses?
These are from C3 data as well.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah.
Great.
Great question though. So
Can I
just
actually, there's a
yeah,
question that I think might, so Brian Gold wonders if I'm reading the chart correctly, 6,200 kids for around 900 new FCC providers mean that the bulk of them do not have assistance. Is that correct?
I would say that's a good understanding to take from those numbers. Kind of what I talked about in the report was that if we, currently the maximum is 10 kids, um, 10 kids at an FCC program. And if you look at those numbers, they're not serving, not every provider
Right,
that started is serving those 10 kids. So it
right,
could be because they don't have an assistant or space or other constraints, but
right.
digging into where that difference comes from is definitely important to make sure that we're maximizing the opportunity of growing this sector.
And that's always a challenge, right? What's the capacity available and then what's really
Mhm.
happening. So great
Right,
to have that C3 data.
right. All right, so just wrapping up, we really want to try to build on this momentum. There's been a lot of growth in funding and just attention to early education and the workforce at the state level, but especially in a time where there's a lot of economic uncertainty, policy uncertainty in DC, trying to make sure that we don't lose out on that growth is really important. So, the first recommendation, again, that we made in the report was around data collection so that this information can really help assist policymakers and make programs really effective and responsive. So I just included some of the specific data recommendations on there, again, to incorporate into the new educator portal and be able to kind of um, link educators track this more effectively than having to pull from multiple different sources, I think would be really helpful. Then in the kind of maintain and build category recommendation, we believe that really strongly that C3 should really be maintained and strengthened. If there's funding, new funding that becomes available, C3 funding should be expanded, especially to account for increased costs that we've seen in the sector. And then I know that there's been kind of other recommendations to how to utilize C3 funding, to increase salaries and things like that. But really, I think C3 is a great tool and should be supported going forward. The other kind of programs that we wanted to highlight to be able to maintain and build on are the staff childcare program. And like I said, funding has been limited in recent years. So if funding remains limited for that program, are there other kind of incentives that maybe the task force or other folks could think of to incentivize programs to offer benefits, childcare benefits for their staff? And then again, kind of explore strategies to continue to grow the FCC sector, increase compensation for assistants so that FCC providers are able to retain educators. And then, of course, providing additional support for training, startup, business support for providers. And then I also mentioned in the report looking at the provider reimbursement rate structure for FCCs, which is different from centers and might have a kind of depressing effect on their ability to expand and sustain access. And then lastly, the big recommendation at the end is just to prioritize collaboration, especially through the task force, and then really focus on sustainability, especially at a time when funding at the state and federal level could be very difficult. So um, we're probably not going to see another $1 billion increase. That would be great, but at least not next year. So how do we kind of intentionally plan and sustainably utilize funding that we receive from the state? One example I have is the Fair Share Innovation and Capital Fund, which is taking excess fair share dollars that don't get spent in the operating budget and using them for one-time and capital needs in education and transportation. We really feel that those funds should be focused on those one-time expenditures so that we don't end up in a system where funding has to be taken away for an ongoing program because of the one-time nature of those
Right.
funds. So some ideas I talked about in the report were to look at program startup costs, capital improvements, things like that, but really focusing on sustainable programs and funding sources where possible. And that's all I have. I
Thanks so much at
said everything.
9:59. If folks
Okay.
can join me in chat, sharing some love and appreciation for Victoria. Just it's so incredible to hear first what exists, then how to pull it all together, and then to really think about where the gaps are. Tom Weber also kind of had another chain going about job boards, so that was helpful
Mm,
to see in the chat. Donna Dennett said high turnover rates then impact stress for program leadership, leading to increased decisions to leave those jobs. So we
mhm,
know that's also a challenge. Neri and I both put in links for the Summit. Krista Kelleher added the UMass report. Krista Kelleher also said, commenting as a parent here who recognizes the value of having male identified early educators, has there been any analysis of the gender breakdown of vocational programs in EEC? I wonder if programs are a place for some focus to encourage more teens to see a potential career path, particularly young males. I'm encouraged my 14-year-old son who just began at Minuteman Voc to explore, but he wasn't interested. So yeah, I guess any gender information.
that's great. A great question. The data I saw statewide was it's somewhere like 92 to 98% women.
Yeah.
And but I love the idea of kind of looking at high schools, looking at other kind of programs, and the apprenticeship model could maybe be a place there as well.
And then lots of appreciation for you pulling this all together. So thank you. We need a big push on this, says Titus. Let me know if anyone out there is recruiting in early ed. Yes, we know Craig Simpson was a kind of big advocate for this as when he was working in the field. So Victoria, if you send me the slides, we'll post them in our follow-up folder. We'll post the recording on our YouTube channel. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow. And thank you, Victoria. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
tomorrow on the 9:30 call.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Have a great day.